Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, is part of the cultural consciousness and has been for so long and to such an extent that it is virtually impossible not to have been somehow affected by that image. While not intending necessarily to be, many movies aimed at a female audience may have taken cues from Mary Shelley's masterwork from over 200 years ago. Frankenstein is the story of a man who creates a creature condemned as a monster, but questions morality via the question of whether it is the creature or creator who is the monster. Frankenstein is also a story that symbolically perverts the feminine into grotesque caricature with its representation of gender and gender roles. Movies such as Mean Girls, Clueless, and The Devil Wears Prada call the same question forward and represent similar expressions of symbolism. These movies are therefore among the Frankenstein adaptation canon by being excellent inadvertent allusions to the same themes. To expand upon the aspects of Frankenstein that are herein to be explored, we begin with the making of a monster. In the original novel, Dr. Victor Frankenstein, over the course of quite some time, gathers body parts from graves to create his creature, the large, grotesque, and sickly-looking caricature of human life known as Frankenstein's monster. Secondly is the perversion of the feminine. The traditionally feminine role of birth giver and nurturer are twisted inside out by Victor as he, a man, builds a fully grown man in his attic. The act contrasts a mother growing a child in her womb, which is usually seen as, or depicted as, beautiful, even a holy thing. But Victor has made childbirth into something hideous and monstrous. Finally, there is the understanding that the creature is not the monster, Victor is. Though part of the cultural consciousness involved the creature's face associated with the doctor's name, that is not the case. This misconception is actually symbolic of the perception surrounding the protagonists. Is it truly the creature who did not ask to be brought into this world, and who asked only for love, who is the monster? Or is it his creator, who brought the creature into the world and then rejected him along with his own motherhood, who is the monster? With these points in mind, we move on to what is quite possibly as quintessential a representation of making a monster as Frankenstein itself, Mean Girls. Mean Girls has been part of the cultural consciousness for almost 20 years, though only a fraction of the time that Frankenstein has had in the world. One would be damn near as hard-pressed to find someone who didn't know about a certain Wednesday tradition as one might be to find someone who hadn't at least heard of Victor Frankenstein. The story of Katie Heron, naive and unfamiliar with the world beyond the nature reserves of Kenya and turned into a plastic to match the hard outer shells of Regina George, Gretchen Wieners and Karen Smith, is a well-known one to many. It is also a perfect reflection of many of the aspects of the story of Frankenstein. Beginning with the making of a monster, Katie is of course the creature. However, the plastics are not Victor. Janice is, with Damien playing an almost Igor-like figure from some of the Frankenstein adaptations, acting as Janice's assistant in her scheme. When Katie first arrives at North Shore High School, she is not only unfamiliar with the new school, but with the entire country that she is now living in. She has no knowledge of America's customs, knowing only what her parents may or may not have told her, based on their experience from 16 and more years ago. She is like a baby brought into the world for the first time. In her naivete, like Frankenstein's creatures, she seeks only friendship. While Janice and Damien initially offer her the love and acceptance she craves, they push her towards the plastics, starting her transformation into the monster that she becomes. For a large stretch of the movie, Katie is one of the plastics, one of the monsters, and she is even made of parts of them, just as the creature is made of amalgamated body parts. In one scene in the movie, Katie and the other plastics, along with Aaron Samuels, strut down the corridor of North Shore High, and Katie's outfit has aspects of what the other three have been seen in thus far. Like Gretchen has been shown in, she wears a plaid skirt. Like Karen is regularly in, her colour scheme is blue and pink. And her crown jewel in the centre of her chest is a sea necklace, just like Regina's matching R. End of the film, rather than the Frankenstein conclusion of disappearing onto an iceberg, all four plastics are actually reformed from their monstrous ways. Nonetheless, the third point is herein addressed, as Janice actually points out that she is aware that she too is a bitch, but at least she openly exists as one and doesn't pretend to be anything other than what she is. Janice is as mean a girl as any of them. She admits it to herself. She is just as much the villain of Mean Girls as Regina or Katie, and she is as much the monster as her creation. About the monstrous feminine though, as just established, Janice is as mean as the plastics that are certainly set up to be the villains of Mean Girls, but it is they who truly represent the feminine being perverted into a villainous status. Where Victor's feminine act of bringing life into the world is the twisted and ugly distortion of the act, the plastics' femininity is what makes them seem distorted. The plastics are hyper-feminine. Each of them does stereotypically girly things, usually centered around fashion and appearance, but they pervert the traditionally feminine with their callousness, opposite of the maternal nurturing image. Just as Victor seemed to be filling a feminine role by creating life, the plastics seemed to be nurturing Katie by bringing her into their circle, and just as Victor rejected the results of his own hubris, Katie became too strong and Regina set out to destroy what she had created. Similarly, noting that she also feels like she is the result of Regina, Janice turns Katie into a plastic to destroy Regina. Mean Girls parallels aspects of Frankenstein's story from several perspectives, with Regina, Katie and Janice all taking the role of creature, and with Janice and Regina taking equal role as creator, both of Katie and of each other. Clueless. Mean Girls is not the first of its ilk, and indeed, Clueless tracks its origins back to a book from the same decade as Frankenstein, with Jane Austen's Emma being actually from earlier. While it is certainly Frankenstein that exemplifies the making of a monster, Emma, and therefore Clueless, take similar cues. Cher Horowitz is as handsome, clever and rich as Victor Frankenstein aspires to be, and is as much his successor as she is Emma Woodhouse's. Cher and her friend Dion take the role of creator upon meeting Ty Frazier, choosing to make her over and turn her into almost a clone of themselves. They change her appearance, her wardrobe, and even how she speaks. And while at first, it seems that she has evolved and grown in a positive direction, Ty's transformation takes a turn for the monstrous during the infamous "You're a virgin who can't drive" scene, in which the creature insults her creator. It is in that moment that we see the feminine perverted also, in a very similar way to Mean Girls, as Ty's outfit reflects how Cher has been shown before. She is wearing a matching set, similar to Cher's from the beginning of the movie. However, hers is in a pretty pastel pink, exaggerating Cher's feminine traits and spitting them back to her in a grotesque caricature. Cher's attempt at nurturing and guidance, taking that feminine and maternal role like Victor, is perverted because Cher needs nurturing herself. Notably, Cher is without a mother, which leads her to being unable to impart any motherly wisdom on another, as she did not receive it herself. Cher has to learn for herself to be caring for others in a meaningful way, exemplified by her volunteering at the end of the movie. Showing that the hubris to shape the world to one's own desires does not end in high school, The Devil Wears Prada exemplifies Frankenstein's monstrous feminine in its highest form, the fully realized monster. The monstrous feminine is obviously Miranda Priestley, the titular devil. Miranda is the editor of a fashion magazine, which is the highest echelon of stereotypical femininity at the time. She does not pervert the feminine from her position of power. In fact, a woman in that particular position arguably upholds the feminine, but rather, in her molding of Andy, she creates someone just as monstrous as she is. Miranda does not force Andy's transformation into her perfect fashion girl assistant single-handedly. She really only facilitates the transformation. Nigel hooks Andy up with the clothes she needs, and Emily, albeit unintentionally, gives her an attitude readjustment. Andy is unaware of her own status as a Miranda girl, no matter how often it is said to her, until Miranda herself points out to Andy that she was willing to take Emily down to further her own career. Again, the costume choices reflect her internal transformation, as Miranda and Andy's dresses are chosen to be very similar in their silhouette in order to show the similarities between creature and creator. Moreover, Miranda has just caused damage to Nigel's progression right before addressing what Andy has done. Andy has become not just a Miranda girl, but the perfect protege to Miranda. Monster creates monster. This is also how the perverted feminine takes hold, as Miranda has created Andy, not by being kind, nurturing, feminine and motherly, but by being callous and encouraging the dog-eat-dog attitude in her employees. Though Victor's attempts at motherhood were subverted by his own abandoning of his creation, Miranda's motherhood is present and persistent and subverted by her cruelty. As to who the actual villain of the story is, Andy's boyfriend is a popular choice, but Miranda, while seemingly somewhat softened by Andy, also seemingly maintains her malicious ways after the events of the movie, whereas Andy has grown from her experience and moved on and improved. Thus, it is clear that the devil is still the monster and Andy has left hell behind. If it has a makeover montage, it might be a modern Prometheus. Many sleepover films, particularly from this time period, pay homage to the concept of the creation of a monster. Heathers and the Duff, as well as many more examples, also deserve the acknowledgement that maybe the created version isn't the best version, with the creations leaving their made-over self behind. Some other titles include She's All That, and of course He's All That, Jawbreaker, and Miss Congeniality, to name but a few. Frankenstein is the story of a madman who flies too close to the sun by playing God, and creates something that, though it only once loved, seems grotesque. Mean Girls, Clueless, and The Devil Wears Prada, among other teen films and rom-coms, represent many of the same aspects, even if through a tame pink lens. Frankenstein is the creation of a creature, and these movies are the recreation of a woman anew. Frankenstein is the perversion of the feminine through subverting meanings of motherhood, and these films pervert the feminine through the contrast of their ideals with their aesthetics. Frankenstein is the complexity of morality, and who, out of creator and creation, is really the monster. And all of these movies explore right and wrong from their own points of view. Just as Dr. Frankenstein was the modern Prometheus of his era, the women and girls in these movies are the creatures of his design.